What are the key attributes of a sales leader?
So, the first key attribute of a sales leader is the ability to be very communicative. You will be communicating upwards to your reporting manager, his boss, usually the regional sales manager or the national sales head. And you will also be communicating to your reporting team, mainly composed of off-role sales officers or on-role executives. And you'll also be communicating with trade, including your distributor partners and retailers. So these three levels of communication have to be very distinct and very clear. You should not mix the language you are communicating in. Basically, when you're speaking to senior management, it should be more of a strategic kind of a communication where you give updates on your territory and how your day-to-day efforts are helping it gain market share and improve the business growth in the long term. When you're communicating with your team, you should be able to roll out your targets, your daily goals in a very simple language, something they can understand and run after. And also, when you're communicating with trade, you have to be very elaborate and very polite so that they feel that you are taking their grievances to heart and you are sort of trying to make their business grow better. This is the communication part. Now, you have to be very proactive in your approach when you are in sales. Claims, distributor claims, retailer doubts, a contract that needs closing, these things sometimes need immediate response. And you cannot have the luxury of waiting for a business day before reverting on such requests that keep coming from trade. So you have to budget and divide your time so that these immediate firefighting things can be taken care of on a proactive basis. Thirdly, you should be very data driven. Data driven meaning you should be able to identify which are the key metrics that you should be chasing in that particular cycle, in that particular week, in that particular month. It should be aligned with the organization's goals, and it should also be possible to implement in your market. If I might give an example. So if you are in a rural market and you need to do your target, so giving your team very steep targets in the premium segment just to ensure that you get your targets very fast will not work. In a smartphone industry, a 30,000, 40,000 set will not sell that much. So a better approach would be to drive your distributor and your team to work in the mid-segment market, where if you have the luxury of a wide variety of outlets, a number of outlets. So if you look at the scale, you can get your targets that way. Just plan accordingly, looking at your market and the organization's goals. Your people management skills are also important. You need to be managing large amount of people. Like in a telecom industry, you have promoters, you have people who are managing the promoters, then you have sales officers, then you have super distributor and his ASMs. So you have to be very, very calm, and you have to be very clear when you're communicating with people, because not all these interactions are going to be face-to-face interactions. You're going to have a lot of phone calls, a lot of messaging. So the language and the way you're communicating with these people should always motivate them, should always encourage them to go the extra mile for you. It should not demotivate or scare them. So that is also very important as you are a sales leader. Lastly, you should be very optimistic. No matter what happens, no matter what downtrends your market shows, no matter what distributor is telling you, you have to be optimistic. You have to believe in the product. You have to believe in the brand, and you have to believe in yourself most importantly. This attitude, this winning attitude is very important, because in a sales environment, when you're working in field sales, you're managing a vast district or a vast state, you will be alone for a while. So if you don't have that optimism inside you, it will be very difficult for you to enjoy your job. So yeah, be communicative, proactive, data driven, be a good people manager, and lastly, be very optimistic. These are the key attributes of a sales leader.
how to benchmark, analyze, and assess both Salesforce work and performance.
So the most obvious answer is to look at the target versus achievement of that particular person working on your team. That is done, yes. But as a sales manager, you are expected to go the extra mile to understand and benchmark the person's performance. And sometimes you have to create your own framework to benchmark your team, because challenges faced in your market might be different from other markets. Also, industry to industry, trade to trade, the KPIs of Salesforce keep changing. So you have to be very precise when you're evaluating your team, because when you benchmark, analyze, and assess, you also give feedback to your team so that they can action it and improve their performance. So firstly, you should look at the discipline that they are applying in their day-to-day activities. The punctuality, the amount of quality time spent in retail doing calls, and their ability to communicate with the distributor and the salesman, and then close the drives that we are initiating. It's very common for a company to have drives where you kind of liquidate the products which are not going to be obsolete. This is common in smartphones. So there your sales officers have to sit with the distributor and plan which are the outlets where they will be putting that SKU. So their connect with retail and their ability to convince the distributor, comes into being. So this is also one interesting point on which you can understand how well your team is working. Next, you look at the total distribution, the width of distribution, the depth of distribution, whether all the variants are present in the outlets or not. So that is also done. You can do from your dashboard, and you can also spend time in retail to understand whether market hygiene is being followed. Another thing we recommend is having monthly meetings with your entire team, where they present to you what new initiatives that they have undertaken in their market, as well as their achievements versus their target. This helps them evolve into more professional versions of themselves, and it also ensures that your benchmarking process, your assessment process is not biased. It's an objective process. So they kind of believe in the sanctity of it, and they will run in and chase their targets. So in the next review, they can kind of shine in. So it's just like a mini ASM review that we have that you organize for your team. It helps in boosting morale and motivates your team members. So that is how you benchmark and analyze your sales force's performance.
What are the important elements in a good sales pitch?
Okay. So in a good sales pitch, the most important element is always the need of the consumer or the customer. In any industry, in any sector, this is the most important element. You need to be very clear why your product should be considered by the consumer. So for that, I'll take the example of a person walking into a Samsung store or a multi-brand outlet where Samsung phones are sold, to take you through the full sales process. So when a consumer walks in, promoter asks the consumer why that consumer needs a new smartphone. Basically, he asks it very simply. He just asks him, what do you use your phone for? Normally, the answer is to take good photos, and sometimes if the consumer wants, he'll say to use as a personal assistant and kind of to check my emails and stuff. So then, looking at the need of the consumer, the promoter starts highlighting that particular USP of the product. A smartphone has a range of features, but not all of them are relevant to the consumer. So if the promoter starts explaining all the features one by one, the person will get bored and may not stick around to listen to the entire demonstration. So you have to be very clear why your consumer needs your product. Then you have to go and benchmark your product with your competitor's product also. So there is no question of switching, because in a crowded MBO or a multi-brand outlet, there are promoters from other brands standing shoulder to shoulder with the Samsung promoter. So when the Samsung promoter is explaining the USP of the product, he or she should be very much aware of the competitor's product also. And he'll be able to, give the unbiased review of the particular Samsung smartphone with reference to the computer's product also. Then the final touch is the look and feel of the product. So in a Samsung store, you'll find live demo phones placed on the planogram. So where the customer can actually hold the phone and kind of play around with it and see the experience for himself or herself. And with the promoter standing by his or her side, he explains the features and the customer is 100% convinced. So in a sales pitch, you have to be very clear about the need of the consumer, the USP of your product, as well as the differentiating factor with reference to your competitor. And then the customer should be able to sample your product. So even if it's a pitch where you're sitting in at a table, maybe communicating your would-be distributor, maybe in this case, you should have something ready. If it's a distributor, you should have the ROI sheet ready of a sample distributor, of a model distributor, so that person can understand how much money he or she can make. So these are the key elements of a good sales pitch.
How did you manage distribution network at Samsung?
So in Samsung, I had 10 distributors. They were divided across one district. I really had to prioritize my time when I dealt with the distributors. So for the smaller distributors who were contributing less than 10% per distributor to my target, to my total value, and also they had fewer number of larger retail shops which needed visits, I used to delegate to my team of sales officers. They were doing bi-weekly visits or weekly visits and sitting with the distributor and resolving the distributor's claims. I visited the smaller distributors to hand awards personally. And when I visited, I also did market together with the smaller distributors. I was always available on call. So whenever they had any query or any doubt, I was always available. That way, I ensured that the tail end of the market was taken care of, but my bandwidth was free for the 40 to 50% of my market came from one or two distributors. They needed weekly, bi-weekly, sometimes thrice a week visits to ensure that the secondary was happening, the retailer credit was being given, and they were functioning as per the Samsung norms. The Samsung norms are very strict. Like I said, no out of stock is allowed. All the outlets built last month should get built this month. All the SKUs that have been built to a particular outlet in last month should again get built this month. So that always didn't happen. So the larger distributors tried to put all their eggs in one basket, tried to give all the credit to the large outlets with whom they had good relationships with. So a lot of hand-holding, a lot of discussions with these distributors needed to be done. So I put my bandwidth over there. So I ensured that the 40, 50%, 60% of my market's numbers were in check. And the smaller distributors, I visited less often. There were other stakeholders also part of the full distribution chain who need to be managed. We had a super distributor who had an ASM. The super distributors, ASMs, managed the distributors in terms of their payment, their credit, their billing. So sometimes that also needed a little bit of coordination and discussion. So that was also there. Gratification of distributor is a very important task which needs to be done by the ASM. Like I said, you can visit, you can hand over awards, you can hand over token mementos. You can go for a joint market visit together to kind of, improve your bonding. And then when visits happen, you have to take seniors to your distribution points to show how things are happening. So that speaks volumes for the distributor. when a company person, somebody senior visits. Also, we created model distributors. There were 2 or 3 model distributors with a very trained MIS, a very clear system of documenting the sale, the claims. So these distributors were used to train the other distributors. Suppose somebody had a new MIS recruited, we would send this MIS to the model distributor point, and the MIS would spend a week over there getting trained. Or a salesman got recruited, or a new distributor came up. So we would send them to the model distributors so they could learn how to efficiently run a distribution point. So that way, I think we had a pretty robust distribution network at Samsung, and I'm sure the other ASMs did the same. So in an upcountry market, the distribution is very important as your retail visits.
How do you conduct a market segmentation, and what are the parameters to be considered for a good market segmentation strategy?
Okay. So you only do a market segmentation when the customer profile or the consumer profile is significantly different. It is different in terms of buying behavior, and it is different in terms of purchasing power. Only then you go ahead and you decide to segment the market. I'll take you through my segmentation plan in Samsung, where I was looking after a district called Hooghly district. I divided into rural and semi-urban. Basically, I divided it into main line along the railway tracks, and there was something called a chord line, which is more of a rural sort of a railway track. So why this railway track thing? So basically, if you look at our consumers, wherever they live in, they travel using the railway system to the market, to visit their relatives, to do whatever errands they want. And in the process, they conduct their purchases also. So for a main line, which is more of a semi-urban market, I will have to plan differently. I'll have more high impact, high visibility POSMs. I will push more premium SKUs. Internet connectivity is also better. So finance is also present. Finance meaning the EMI at the point of sale. So a lot of things I can do in that market, I cannot always execute in a rural market, which is the core line. Because over there, the outlets, the density of the market is it's a different density. Basically, it's small stations with farms and farmland in between. So over there, you have to be very specific and find out what are the main trading centers, what are the market towns. And you only have to invest over there and leave it to your distributor and his salesman to ensure that the width of distribution is maintained across the geography. You cannot invest everywhere over there. Whereas in a semi-urban market, you have a lot of main high street, main road shops where you can invest and you can grow those shops to give you higher revenues. So a rural market is one, and a semi-urban market within a geography is one segmentation that I did in Samsung. Now, when I went to Bangalore and I started working with Philip Morris, and the entire market was a metro market. So here I had to look at the consumers' habits to understand how I segment my market. So here I looked at nightclubs, pubs, where people come out and they purchase their cigarette supply. Then there's malls and restaurants which they visit in the daytime. And they might also want to purchase cigarettes over there. And the last one is the corporate areas where people go out to work, and in the break time, they might want to purchase cigarettes. So there are 3 vastly different areas, and people go there for vastly different purposes. So the outlets I need to select where I should be present, my POSM should be present, will be divided into these 3 buckets. And this is how I will segment my market. I will look at the full metro city and I will find out where the nightclubs are located, where the restaurants are located, and where the corporates are located. And I'll find out the best possible shops in these clusters. Likewise, my rates will also change. The rental I will be paying to the shops in the nightlife and in the malls, as well as in the corporates, will be different. So this is a way in which you can segment your market depending on the customer's habits, the customer's behavior, as well as the purchasing power, which is the rural and the semi-urban classification. Another deep dive classification which we do in FMCG is we look at the king size cigarettes and regular size cigarettes. So we look at areas where the value of king size segment is higher and the areas where the regular size cigarette is higher. So you look at any uniting characteristics of these areas. Is it more traditional? Is it full of people above the age of 40, 45 years who go more after the king size cigarettes, or is there any trend? And you try to benchmark your clusters. You try to benchmark your shops based on these parameters. So is it a king size heavy shop? Is it an RSFT shop? Are there shops just like these in other parts of the city? So this is how you do in FMCG. Whereas in mobiles, it's more precise. It's more purchasing power oriented, more of a demographic thing. So there certain towns have a certain sort of a population. You can just look at the demographic, the socioeconomic dashboard, and you can plan accordingly. Like you will not have an exclusive shop in a tier 3, tier 4 sort of a place. Whereas you'll have an exclusive in a maybe tier 2 town also, you can have an exclusive store. So that's basically how you decide, how your decisions are influenced by how you're segmenting your market. This is something you only do to understand your market better, and you kind of plan in a strategic manner. If you segment your market, then you can have different plans for different segments of your market.
So what are the challenges faced by an area sales manager?
The biggest challenge that you will face as an area sales manager is, in my opinion, the top-down approach. So people meaning your seniors or the brand team or the marketing team will trickle down or cascade down certain plans, certain ideas, and you have to execute it. You may not always agree with the approach, you may not always agree with the plan also, but you always have to execute it. So here, there are two ways of doing it. One is to go by the military discipline approach. We kind of tell your team ki karna hi padega, mujhe pata nahi kyun, but karna hi padega. So that is something you should never do. You should, try to understand why it is being done. Even if it is not logical, you have to fine tune it and you have to water it down when it reaches your team. So, you have to absorb a lot of pressure. What I mean is, a lot of pressure, a lot of stress will trickle down the chain to you, but it should stop. It should not flow from you to your team members. Because as an area sales manager, you're expected to handle the pressure, handle the top-down approach, and kind of divide it uniformly in your team so that they chase the goals and they do it in a motivated manner. They do not stress out and panic. So that is one of the challenges, how you kind of handle the top-down approach and how you, use it to give benefit back to you. Secondly, as an area sales manager, you might sometimes feel a little alone. It happened to me because you are the only person from the company in that particular geography, in that particular area. There's nobody else from the company, especially if you are handling an off-role team. So you don't have, you can't really compare notes, like, are you doing it the right way? So one interesting thing I had done, I'm not sure whether it was the best thing. I used to communicate with my predecessor a lot. Like I used to call him, I used to ask him, what are the idiosyncrasies of these retailers? How did you handle this? So that kind of helped. Secondly, it is very important to discuss with your fellow ASMs in different industries or in the same company how they are dealing with the challenges. You need not do what they are doing, but discussing and debating kind of releases the pressure. because we do not have that water cooler conversation, that canteen conversation thing that people in other divisions have. Yeah, we have a lot of freedom, a lot of scope to innovate, but we also sometimes need to understand how people in similar profiles resolve their problems. So that's a challenge, and you have to resolve by communicating with people who are in a similar position. Another challenge that you'll face as an area sales manager is the constant grievance of the distributors and the retailers will have with reference to their payments and their payout spending. So this is like a question of money, and you have to evaluate each and every pain point and understand whether it is valid or not, whether your company can afford to give an exception and release the payout or not. So that's a decision you have to take with caution, because it's a question of money that is being released by your company, and looking at your submission, your request, the company will trust you and release the money. So you have to be very choosy which are the requests that you will entertain if they are of an exceptional nature. If they are not of an exceptional nature, if it's a genuine claim, you should resolve it as soon as possible. So these challenges are faced by an area sales manager, but I would say that it's a job like any other job. So best is to have a very process-oriented approach towards most of the tasks that you do, so they get done on time. And timelines, you should set yourself your own timelines that by this few months, I want to complete this for this distributor. I want to have this much of growth. I want to add so many marquee outlets in this particular cluster. You should have your own goals. So the challenge is people will not spoon feed you. They will give you daily targets, but you will be evaluated and benchmarked with reference to your peers with what new initiatives you're taking up, what you're doing out of the box extra to improve the market share and ensure the growth of the company's business. So that is something you have to keep doing with your transactional tasks, the extra part, the strategic part that you have to keep doing, so that when you show that to someone, people understand your hard work. So yeah, that's about it, I think.